Another mystery buried deep in the hills of eastern Washington keeps resurfacing. A bottomless pit said to be a pathway to the paranormal. KOMO4's Denise Whitaker heads east in search of the hole.
The one guy claims that he threw his departed canine down into the hole. He swears the dog actually came back to him.
Deep in the forests of Washington state lies a hole that makes the Grand Canyon look shallow. Known as Mel's Hole, it's described as a pit so deep that it could pierce through the other side of the earth. Local legends claim it brought animals back to life and opened pathways to other dimensions. Now, experts from the Washington State Department of Natural Sciences unearthed an old pit near Ellensburg that closely matches those stories. What did they uncover, and what made the footage so terrifying? Join us as we explore the odd history and chilling new developments surrounding Mel's Hole. Mel's first experience. It was just another day in paradise, and by paradise, of course, we mean the early 90s. Like most men of his kind, Mel Waters was living a pretty normal life at his home near Ellensburg in Washington. There were beautiful trees and hummingbirds, giving him the peaceful life he always wanted. But this is where things took a weird turn, as Mel Waters also had a mysterious hole in his backyard that nobody could explain. Contrary to what you might think, this wasn't a normal suburban situation. It turns out the hole had been there for much longer than anyone could remember. Everyone who grew up in the neighborhood was told by their grandparents about this bottomless pit. Like a horrible family recipe nobody wanted to try out, it was passed down through generations with nobody knowing what to do with it. But Mel wasn't like the others. He was curious to know more about this pit that everybody heard of, but never explored. So while other men like him were worried about always having to clean their swimming pools, Mel had to worry about accidentally dropping his car keys into the center of the earth. That's right, he got curious enough to check the hole and somehow lost his keys while looking inside. He heard no sound when the keys fell in, but wasn't the type to accept that the hole was indeed bottomless. You see, many described Mel as being stubborn and strong-willed. Mel Waters was the type who would poke a sleeping bear just to see what happened. But that didn't mean he was careless, so the first thing he tried was a fishing line. He took lots of it and started dropping it down, and after what felt like forever, he had hit 80 feet and was still going. He was now at the end of his rope, this time literally. However, this was where the story got interesting, as Mel was about to do the craziest thing imaginable just to get his car keys. A few days passed, and his neighbor's dog had passed away, and instead of giving it a proper burial as normal people would, something in his head made him think it was a good idea to throw the poor animal's body into the bottomless pit. Now keep in mind that this happened in the early 90s in rural Washington, a time when people did weird things, and they still do, by the way. So just as planned, Mel threw the dog's body into the abyss, and the same thing happened. No sound, no thud, just darkness. It was like the body had phased out of existence. This meant Mel had to give up on this. He could finally move on and figure a way around the situation. But that was just the beginning, as according to Mel, that same dog climbed out of that pit as if nothing had happened. It was very much alive and well, except for one tiny detail. And as you would expect from something that died, fell into the center of the earth, came back to life, and somehow climbed its way back, the dog had lost its mind. The once shy pet that somehow came back to life was now described by Mel and his neighbors as violent and always out for blood. Now the hole wasn't just bottomless, but also brought the dead back to life with new personalities. Before this point, the local folks treated the hole with respect and curiosity, like something unbelievable but intriguing to tell stories about. But after what happened with the dog, that respect quickly turned into genuine fear. Now imagine this for a moment. You are a trusted and respectable man who has just found a mysterious hole many in your neighborhood believe is a portal to another dimension in your backyard. What is the most logical thing to do? Would you announce it with full confidence on national radio at the risk of losing your life and everything you hold dear? Well, if your answer is yes, then you and Mel Waters might have a lot in common, as that is exactly what he chose to do not long after all this happened. Mel's biggest regret. You see, Mel's experience would have remained a local tale if he hadn't decided to call into Coast to Coast AM, a famous late-night radio show that discussed people's encounters with the impossible. On that program, people discussed everything from finding Bigfoot to seeing UFOs. The host of the show was famous for giving everyone a chance to share their stories with millions of fellow Americans battling insomnia and hungry for entertainment. Mel's big day came on February 21st, 1997. He picked up the phone and dialed into the show. This call became the most famous in the show's history, and Mel spoke with the host of the show, Art Bell.
Late-night radio kingpin Art Bell, who started his career at a Las Vegas radio station before he became an international star.
About everything he experienced, from the bottomless hole to the fishing line experiment to the dog coming back to life. Perhaps what made people enjoy this was how Mel spoke about it. He was calm and collected all through the report, and listeners were hooked. Some believed his words, others didn't. But they were all interested enough to learn more. Nobody could stop talking about it for weeks. The story spread much faster back then than cat videos do on TikTok today, which is saying something. In fact, the story spread so fast that Mel was called for more details just 3 days later on February 24th to add more details to his story. It seemed Art Bell and his audience couldn't get enough of Mel's experience. However, that was where the problem started. You see, not long after appearing on radio, Mel started giving hints about various political leaders showing interest in his property. Please keep in mind that he never admitted that the military had taken over his land. What he did admit was that some very serious and frightening people came in official vehicles and showed up asking very disturbing questions about his backyard. Apparently, mysterious people had started poking around his home. This was much scarier than what modern celebrities have to deal with on a constant basis, like annoying fans and paparazzi. They weren't nosy neighbors and curious tourists, but armed men with badges and clipboards. The meaning behind their sudden appearances were clear. As far as Mel was concerned, if the higher-ups were interested, it wasn't out of curiosity. Sadly, it seemed something about this pit had caught the attention of those concerned about national security. So what got them so interested? And what threats did they verify? Tragically, Mel found out the answers to these questions. And the answers weren't pleasant. As almost any celebrity would tell you, fame isn't always fun, and Mel learned that the hard way. He claimed that there was a mysterious hole that connected to another dimension, and just like that, what started from a simple telephone call on a late-night radio show quickly turned to his worst nightmare: clashes with the military. As time went on, more men in nice suits and not-so-nice attitudes made his property much busier than a McDonald's at lunchtime. He couldn't call the authorities about it, as the ones causing trouble for him were the authorities. It was at this point Mel realized that revealing a bottomless pit able to raise dogs back to life wasn't such a good idea. These officers weren't there to congratulate him for what he found. They were there to control it. For most of early 2000, the pressure was becoming difficult to bear. He found himself dealing with the authorities camping outside his home and forcing him to agree to say no more about the pit by signing NDAs. And like most hard-working men, Mel's once peaceful life had turned into a bureaucratic nightmare, complete with endless paperwork and pressure never to complain about the difficulties he was having. Mel recalled one time he went to the hole shortly before Easter that year. He went there with various equipment to find out more about the mysteries of this pit, and picked up a radio broadcast of what sounded like a live basketball game. Mel thought it was normal until he noticed it was broadcasting a basketball game that had been played over 30 years before, sometime in the 60s. Mel said it wasn't a replay, but a live transmission from the past. Though he said nothing more about that, what he meant was very clear. Now the hole wasn't just deep or bottomless. Not only could it raise animals back to life, now it was a time machine that could tap into different periods from the past. Mel felt like he had stepped into something far beyond his understanding and wished he had never told anyone his story. He had now lost his quiet life and personal privacy. So how would he try to get himself out of the situation? By calling the late-night show once again and telling his story like nothing happened. On the show, he made it clear that he wished he had never called, and now he's forced by higher-ups to sign NDAs and leave his family behind to live someplace far enough from home. How far, you ask? How about a 26-hour flight to Australia? To add insult to injury, Mel claimed he found evidence that the military knew about the hike long before he called the radio program. This implied that Mel simply stumbled on something discovered by the military for decades. Based on his call on the radio, Mel Waters found multiple military blueprints and survey documents that showed how the place was being studied without people knowing about it. These blueprints, according to Mel, showed plans to build a research station at the hole. So the government bought the land for research and somehow forgot to mention that they owned it. These government officials forgot to keep the place off limits for decades before Mel and many others settled in the area. These same authorities described by Mel also took no precautions, even though they knew the land had a dark and bottomless portal to the past that could bring animals back to life. As strange as all this sounds, let's, for the sake of what scientists found out later, agree all that was true. Mel was given an ultimatum. Either sign the NDA or risk losing everything. Mel stated he was threatened with losing his home and access to everything he held dear. The only solution was agreeing not to reveal more about what he found. The NDA covered not only the hole, but the government's involvement and the loss of his property. Signing it would stop the legal troubles and endless loss of money, but it also meant he could not talk about his experiences. To get all this over with, Mel Waters eventually signed the agreement. Now he was legally stopped from talking about the biggest experiences of his life. Without wasting time, he said his goodbyes and headed for Australia. After staying there for over a year, somehow, the head of the Coast to Coast AM late-night show found a way to reach Mel. It seemed many listeners of his program had been asking about Mel and wanted to hear from him again. Despite the NDA, Art Bell was able to convince Mel to return for another interview. Apparently, the temptation to tell his story was too strong to resist, even though he knew it would bring unwanted attention and grave consequences. Ignoring the warnings, Mel was back on the air on January 29, 2002, to share everything that had happened since the last time he called. Like that wasn't bad enough, Mel suddenly decided it was time to return to America to reunite with his family. Of course, that turned out to be a bad decision, as Mal would enter a bus headed to his family's home. Sitting on his seat was the last thing he remembered before blacking out. Waking up, he found himself in an abandoned building in San Francisco. Mel tasted blood in his mouth and felt pain coming from various parts of his body. Every move he made felt painful, and when he checked what date it was, he noticed that it had been 12 whole days since he got on the bus headed to his family's new neighborhood. It seemed there was no distance too far when it came to signing an NDA given by the most powerful government in the world, whether in the US or in Australia. The reasons were clear. There was no escape for the consequences of breaking the agreement. It seemed someone with a lot of resources and deep pockets was serious about keeping Mel under control, and it worked. Eventually, he moved to the Basque region of Nevada, Mel's second pit and the recent discovery. Mel probably thought relocating to Nevada was the break he needed from the whole drama associated with that pit. But like trying to escape that crazy uncle at family reunions, the weirdness never stops following you. This new pit was like the pro version of Mel's hole, except this time it was more open about how it broke the laws of physics. Now let's get back to elementary science. You know how regular ice melts when it gets hot, how it melts due to the heat? Well, when Mel dropped ice cubes down into this new pit, the ice didn't melt. It caught fire instead. Yes, you heard that right. Ice cubes were on fire. These cubes burned like wooden torches from medieval times, falling into the eternal abyss. But that wasn't all. Mel did something much crazier than he did back in the 90s. He decided within himself that it was a good idea to lower a living and breathing sheep down into the same hole that set ice cubes on fire. Why? Because it was apparently the perfectly logical thing to do in that situation. This poor sheep, according to Mel, kicked very hard and tried to escape, not wanting to be anywhere close to the pit. But Mel lowered it and waited. Half an hour passed and Mel brought it out. In just 30 minutes, the sheep had grown a tumor inside its body, and the tumor had something growing inside. And inside the tumor was an underdeveloped baby seal. The weirdness didn't stop there. Mel was allegedly diagnosed with cancer, but got healed after that experience. Other stories imply that he wasn't the only one who experienced a healing like this. The laws of physics broke, and the environment was in chaos. But one cabin close to the hole was where all the action was. Above the roof were flying birds with beautiful colors, and the only strange thing about them was that they were bulletproof. Local hunters aimed multiple tokens with regular hunting rifles. The bullets, they said, would either pass through or bounce right off. Later on, it was said that these were just regular birds with powers gotten from the hole. Mel said that one ice cube that caught fire was brought into the cabin where he stayed, and this ice cube became so hot that it melted into the ground. No matter where he would keep it, the burning ice vibe would melt where it stood and keep going deeper into the earth. Mel believed this ice cube was trying to create a new bottomless hole each time it was placed on a surface. He told all of this to Art Bell, the late-night show host that made Mel famous.
Have you guys ever heard of Mel's Hole?
Mel's Hole.
Mel's Hole.
No.
This is the wildest thing I've heard in a while.
Okay.
Okay. Go.
That's high standards.
I heard it from, it's a well-known story.
Art was excited and made plans for Mel to show up at the studio in person so they could talk at length about everything he had seen and heard. This time, he would have the time to talk about everything without limit and be open to answer all listeners. Calls would come from all over the country, and he would answer as much as he can. Seeing this as an opportunity, Mel agreed to come on the radio show once again to tell everything. Mel at this point had become the Indiana Jones of mysterious pits. The world was excited to hear more from him, but this is where the explorer's funny story quickly turns into a tragic mystery. According to Art Bell, after Mel agreed to come on the show, he never heard from him after that. No one heard from Mel Waters again. He never showed up for the interview, never called to plan another date, and never called anyone again. No public records hinted at where he went after that, or what could have happened to him. As far as the world knew, Mel Waters had been erased from existence, and it seemed the belief that someone was trying to keep Mel under control at all times was true. Now here comes the final part of this mystery. Back in the early 2000s, before Google Maps, people relied on an old mapping service called Terra Server. And the location of Mel's hole that was confirmed by many locals who knew about the things he did showed nothing but ordinary forest. There wasn't any sign of an open well, let alone a hole with strange features around it. All the satellite found was a plain forest with nothing special about the area. For some, this was the perfect thing to put the whole story to bed, and that was mostly the case until 2012, when famous geologist Jack Powell found a similar pit in Washington. And just last month, almost 30 years after the radio call, paranormal investigators with help from the Washington State Department of Natural Sciences identified what they believe is the actual joke behind the legend. And of course, the visitors who expected to find a bottomless pit with time travel and life-giving capabilities were quickly disappointed when the camera footage showed the hole was nothing more than an old mining shaft northwest of Ellensburg. So, what do you think? Is the recent finding what Mel Waters spoke about almost 30 years ago, or is this another effort to silence the stories of his discoveries? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.